You're listening to The Ones Who Succeed on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your pods. I'm Campbell Barron, or at Campbell J. Barron on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. Welcome to the program. The tech sector is a hot topic these days, and it seems like the narrative surrounding the industry has evolved over the years. Needless to say, during a time like this where Silicon Valley seems to influence almost every aspect of our daily life, the job of a tech journalist to keep Silicon Valley in check seems to be more and more important. And as the narrative surrounding Silicon Valley has evolved from a new social network for colleges to Russia hacked the election, there are a handful of key journalists bringing you a true and transparent take regarding the fast-paced, ever-changing region known as Silicon Valley. And one of those prominent journalists in the field is someone by the name of Casey Newton. Casey is a reporter for the publication The Verge. He's known for his critical words in regards to Facebook in the recent years, and rightfully so, in addition to his reporting on acquisitions, new products, and news, good and bad, coming straight out of Silicon Valley. Casey also writes a popular newsletter, The Interface, focused on sharing stories about platforms and democracies. Casey is, of course, active on Twitter. He actually has some really interesting perspectives surrounding the ever-changing technology landscape in Silicon Valley and beyond. I find he uses Twitter quite well. All of this is why I'm thrilled to have him on the program. This is The Ones Who Succeed. I'm Campbell Barron. I hope you're having a great day today. My conversation with Casey Newton starts now. Well, Casey, I really appreciate you taking the time to come on the program.
It's my pleasure.
I think if you can kind of just briefly introduce yourself, and then we'll kind of get to the more exciting stuff. Who are you and what do you do?
Yeah, so I'm Casey Newton. My title is Silicon Valley editor at The Verge. I've been at The Verge for 7 years, and when I started, I wrote about a pretty wide range of consumer software, everything from productivity tools like Evernote and Dropbox to some of the big social networks. But as time went on, I became more and more fascinated by companies like Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Snap. And in 2017, I decided to basically devote myself to understanding them full time. And so I started a newsletter called The Interface, which covers the intersection of social networks and democracy. And so now I do a mix of writing 4 newsletters a week and then also pursuing bigger investigative reports.
So how'd you get into journalism in the first place, I guess, and technology? What's your origin story there?
Well, when I was in second grade, on the first day, they asked us what we wanted to be when we grew up. And I said I wanted to be a writer. And I think it's important that you honor those commitments. No, I just
second grade.
Yeah.
Oh, no. I hope I don't honor my second grade commitments.
What did you want to be in second grade?
Oh, God. Probably a filmmaker or something.
Yeah,
I was getting into video at that point.
Totally. Well, for me, it was just kind of like a feedback loop where I did write a lot of short stories and poems when I was starting from when I was, 6. And I got a lot of good feedback from my teachers. They're like, oh, this is great. And so I did it more. And the more I did it, the more like praise I got. And then, pretty soon writing was just how I understood the world. So, I was the editor in chief of my high school newspaper. I was the editor in chief of my college newspaper. I think the only thing that really changed along the way was that when I was 7, I thought I was going to be a writer of fiction. But by the time I got to high school, I just felt like I had lost the capacity for that, and the real world seemed way more interesting to me. So I made that switch and have just been going ever since.
Yeah, the real world, it's definitely more interesting in times like these. I love talking tech and talking headlines with my friends, and this is like the best excuse to do it with someone who has such interesting opinions. So I want to try to do this without ripping off Recode Decode too much. But I think now is a very interesting time in tech and kind of the social landscape, especially around platforms. It seems like audio is having a moment. Podcasting is having a moment. We saw Twitter announce their kind of audio tweet, 140-second tweets. And, there's talk around maybe Alexa skills and Google Home, especially in a time where people are not interested in touching things in COVID, maybe having a moment. What are your thoughts on kind of the audio space?
I think it's a bit of a mix. Like over the long term, definitely we're going to see way more innovation in audio. There are some smart people who think that AirPods are going to be Apple's next big platform, that audio is going to be a way that we navigate the world. And I think there's a lot to that. On the other hand, I am listening to so many fewer podcasts than I used to, and I hate it. And the reason is, so I live in San Francisco, and my commute to work, by the time I stopped and got coffee and walked 10 minutes to the office from the subway,
Right.
like I was listening to 45 minutes of audio each way and back. And now I've been trapped in my house for 4 months, and I take like one daily 30-minute walk just to like stretch my legs. And so I'm just not listening to as much audio. So over the long term, yes, I think it is going to be huge and it will rebound. But in the short term, like I can't even get through all the stuff that I want to. So that's like something that I actually hate about quarantine life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think you kind of nailed that point with podcasting. Going into quarantine, I was trying to make all these predictions in regards to like what industries are going to benefit aside from Zoom, right? And podcasting was kind of a coin toss, but I've realized like I was a guy who would just listen to audio constantly while commuting, and I had an hour commute everywhere I would go, basically. Yeah. And I just always have my AirPods in and just constantly be listening to something. And I'm kind of not doing that anymore. And so I think that, and so I probably might listen to one a day in between like doing tasks at home, dishwasher, whatever, laundry, etc. But like the benefit of podcasting and the benefit of kind of these audio experiences seems to really consist of just the commuting aspect of it. And so I'm curious what you think, since we are at home. What are your thoughts on, you kind of mentioned AirPods and that being Apple's next platform. What are your thoughts on voice as a new platform shift? Because I had Nicole Quinn, she's like a VC at Lightspeed, on the podcast a week ago, and she's very bullish on voice being the next platform shift, in terms of like we had web and then we had mobile and then we had voice. So what are your thoughts on that as someone who kind of sees the tech landscape as a whole?
So on one hand, I can understand why VCs are excited about it, because it is this undiscovered country. There's clearly a lot more that can be done. And I don't think there's any reason to be pessimistic about it. But here's what I will say. So I've had an Echo in my house for, 5 years now. And before I got my Echo, I would use my phone to set timers and check the weather. And 5 years later, after having Alexa, I still pretty much use it to set timers and check the weather, right? Mm-hmm. And meanwhile, it's added, 50,000 things that it can do. And Amazon will send me an email every week that's like, hey, ask it for the starting lineup of the Los Angeles Dodgers. And it's like, I'm not going to do that, And so you have this problem where, one, the stuff that it can do just isn't that useful for me day to day. And two, and I think the much bigger problem is, none of this stuff is what a VC or a product person would call discoverable, right? Like I look at my Echo can't tell me what it does unless I ask it to. And then it just reads off a list of 50,000 commands. So it's not just building the functionality, but it's training people how to use it. And I honestly think that neither Amazon or Apple or Google have really made almost any progress at all there.
Discoverability is incredibly hard. Very hard. I mean, it's see, part of me thinks just the usefulness factor. It's just sometimes a lot easier just to swipe on your phone, right? To check the lineup for the Dodgers, as your example. For mass adoption to take place in the skill section, I think the skills have to perform a task easier than performing a task in an iOS app.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I don't know, as we've been talking, I've realized there are a couple of other things that I do use my Echo for. I wake up in the middle of the night and I often just wonder what time it is, but I don't want to turn on a screen and blind myself, so I'll just ask Echo what time it is. Mm-hmm. And I actually use it to control music too. I have a Sonos system in my house, and it is really cool to just, shout out a playlist that you want to hear or tell it to stop right before you leave the house. So I do suspect that over time we'll get more into these things. I also wonder, my nephews are, 7 and 4, and they've just grown up in a world where there has always been something in their house that they can yell at and get it to do things. And I do think that growing up with the expectation that your house can just do things probably will lead to a lot more of this kind of thing. Yeah.
I grew up in the smartphone generation, and so I wouldn't imagine not living without a smartphone. So I will say the only thing I could do is get my Alexa to turn on some LED lights that are connected to like this switch. So I'm not fully there yet. But in terms of this talk with various platforms, right? The iOS App Store is a hot topic these days. And there are obvious reasons why it's a hot topic. From a macro perspective, I've talked to a lot of app developers on this program and a lot of, entrepreneurs. Do you think the iOS App Store is kind of past its heyday?
No, well, probably not. Like, I don't think we've seen the peak of the App Store in terms of like revenue generated by the totality of apps. And in fact, it's so powerful right now that there is an antitrust investigation into it. It's the most significant antitrust investigation we've seen in the United States in 50 years. And I think that reflects just the incredible position that Apple is in. I think it will continue to be in that position unless, one, there is some really strong antitrust enforcement, which I never bet on in the US, or the next platform comes along and Apple doesn't own it, right? Which is like why Facebook is really hoping that VR becomes the next thing. It's why Amazon is hoping that voice becomes the next thing, right? So everybody's trying to build the next app store so that they can take a generation's worth of monopoly profits.
From the perspective of new developers, though, like the days where you can just launch an app and hope it gets 1 million downloads are so gone.
Yeah,
definitely gone.
It's funny. I think it was like 2015. I wrote a story called Life and Death in the App Store. And it was about these guys that had made these like utility apps that just killed it in the early days of the App Store. But eventually it all got added into like
iOS
system apps And they were just like struggling to figure out how to survive in that world. And the whole piece was about kind of the rise and fall of the indie app developers, the person selling the 99-cent ruler app or whatever. Yeah. So yeah, I do think that there's less opportunity there for new people than ever before. And of course, one of the reasons is because Apple wants to take a 30% cut of just about everything now, right? And it's really hard to compete when you're paying such a high tax just to exist.
Yeah. In terms of like the App Store as a whole, do you think because of COVID, people are perhaps interested in downloading new apps? Is there perhaps an increased demand for kind of shuffling around your smartphone apps? Because if you had Uber and Lyft on an Airbnb on your home screen, you're probably going to be shuffling those to the side, at least for the next end of 2020 for sure.
I mean, if you had told, like, I was thinking, like, one of the most ominous things you could have said to me on New Year's Eve this year is, like, later this year, you will go 3 months without opening Google Maps. It was like, what? What does that mean, right? What's about to happen to me? But it's true, because I live within a 6 blocks radius of my house now, and I don't go anywhere else. But, yeah, like, the answer to your question is yes. Like, you can look at the download numbers for apps like Snap, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook over the past few months, and they're all through the roof, right? Like, all of those businesses are actually having a pretty killer year. I mean, yeah, maybe their ad revenue is down from where they hoped it was going to be just because of problems in the larger economy, but the apps themselves are doing phenomenally well. You got a lot of kids who are locked inside and have nothing to do, and TikTok, is phenomenally entertaining, or at least I think it is. I would love to hear if you think it's entertaining.
I do too.
But yeah. So I mean, these apps are just having a killer year.
What do you think about the social media war and Snap Minis? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so, basically every messaging app has always wanted to transform into a super valuable Swiss Army knife that enables e-commerce.
That's a great perspective, a super valuable Swiss Army knife. I love it.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about messaging apps is they're very popular, but they're hard to monetize, right? Like, you have to set up a service that's going to let me send you not just text, but also photos and videos, which means they have to be stored somewhere. You have to pay for the bandwidth, and then you've got hundreds of millions of people using the app. And so it's a very expensive proposition to run one. But then how are you going to charge for it? Because if I have to be a paid member of this messaging service, you're never going to get people to download it in the first place. So everyone's always looking around for, what can we do to actually make this thing make money? And so Snap, like a lot of other messaging apps before it, are trying to enable this kind of e-commerce play. And, there was this guy on Twitter who works at Facebook and who worked on some chat integrations that they did on Messenger that were similar to this in the past. And he was saying that it didn't work because, one, there just aren't that many like killer use cases for this sort of thing where you're, you know, how many times when you're chatting with your friends, do you want to make a transaction from within the chat? At least in terms of what's been invented so far, that doesn't seem super popular. And then two, if you're a developer, you know, what's your incentive? You know, like one of their examples is movie tickets. Well, okay. So does the movie ticket vendor, you know, want to pay a cut to someone else so that you can buy a movie ticket while you're in the chat? Or are they just going to rely on you showing up to the movies and buying a ticket or opening the Fandango app and buying it there, right? So that's the problem, right? Is like, what's going to be the service so valuable that people are going to be willing to let Snap be the middleman?
Yeah, I mean, I will say in 2020 was movie tickets the best example they have.
I know, yeah. I know. It's so funny. All these developers are like pitching me this stuff, and it really is for another world.
Yeah. Like, do you think that there is a chance that it does become a meaningful platform, or if...
Sure. I give everything a chance. Like, I thought TikTok was going to be dead within a year. So I'm just like wrong about stuff all the time. And it's actually like part of the fun of being a tech writer is like you interview people all day long and you read all day long and you're like convincing yourself the whole time you're getting smarter and smarter. And then it like comes time to make a prediction. And then it's just like a coin flip, like about whether you're right or wrong. Yeah. But, you know, I would say on this one, like, I don't think this is going to become a multi-billion-dollar business for Snap. But I would, you know, I'd be happy to be wrong in part because, you know, as a reporter, what I really want at the end of the day is a balance of power, right? Like I want Snap, YouTube, Instagram, Google, TikTok, all to find a place and for there to be room for other people to come in and find a place. And that is going to mean innovating around the business models and not just doing the same things that everyone else has done. So I'm rooting for it.
Are Snap's days numbered, do you think?
I mean, I would love for you to tell me like what your Snap use is like. I feel like, you know, I'm turning 40 tomorrow, so I'm a little ahead of you in the game of life. Thank you. But, you know, most of my friends absolutely aren't using Snap, but I do know a lot of people who do use Snap, and I use it myself. And it is a fun app, and there are a lot of creative, clever ideas in it. It is a factory of good ideas, and more innovation has come out of Snap in the past 5 years, arguably, than has come out of Facebook, I would say, in a lot of ways, at least around like kind of consumer behaviors and those, you know, inventing new uses of social media itself. Snap has just been really, really good at that. So, you know, the other thing that happened this year was that everybody had kind of written it off because its ad business was not going well, and the redesign went terribly, and user growth had collapsed, and it was sort of possible to think, gosh, I don't know if these guys are going to make it. And then they kind of started to figure out their ad business, and then they undid the worst parts of the redesign, and then there was a pandemic and a lot of users came back, right? So like all of the things that looked horrible for them overnight just kind of looked way better. So I actually think they're probably in as good a position now as they've been since they went public.
Yeah, I mean, look, I use Snap once a week. I don't, it's not my ideal medium to communicate with friends.
And what is?
I'm old school. I wouldn't consider myself like the average teen just in terms of my interests. Like I'm interested in startups and venture capital, and like my brother loves Snap and he uses it to send, you know, 20 to 30 pictures of his feet to his friends with a giant S every day. And my dad is just like, what the hell are you doing? And so I'll open it up to see some news maybe once in a while, but I'm a plain old SMS guy or Instagram DM.
So all of your like group chats are like iMessage or
I think I'm in one group chat with my family. I like to have nice long conversations. WhatsApp's voice message feature is amazing. iMessage's voice chat feature is awful, really bad.
Yeah.
So I definitely like to have longer conversations via chat. But if we're looking at COVID, I mean, a lot of people have said it's an accelerant, right? And it's kind of just accelerating various industries. And one of the platforms in beta that has gotten a lot of attention during COVID is this app called Clubhouse. Every time I say it, I get a little bit more jealous. You're the third person I've interviewed that's on the Clubhouse beta.
No, I'm not.
You're not?
I've asked to be on it, and they will not let me in.
Wait, you're not on it?
I'm not on it.
Oh,
they're afraid of me.
I thought you were on it. Oh my God.
They're afraid of what I'll say if I'm given a live mic.
That's interesting. Huh.
Yeah.
Okay, well. So what are your thoughts on Clubhouse?
Man, so again, a lot of people have tried things around audio. When I think of Clubhouse, I think of Anchor. Remember Anchor?
Yeah, I host this podcast on Anchor now. by the way.
Oh, nice. Okay, cool. So yeah, so a lot of good things about Anchor. I used it a fair bit when it first came out, and the idea of making it easy to create a podcast, it was great. They did a lot of really cool work around that. The thing is, you would listen to the median podcast on Anchor, and it was unlistenably boring and bad, right? Mm-hmm. And the reason is because producing good audio is super hard, right? Even just to do this, you've got a nice mic and some headphones, and I'm speaking into a nice mic.
Sync it after. Yeah, bring it into Descript. That's what I use.
Yeah, Descript's fantastic.
It's amazing,
Yeah. Yeah, but it's there is so much that you are putting into this, and even me just as a guest, right? There's an equipment investment that I've made here, right?
Sure.
So it's so you think about Clubhouse, and it's we're the next generation audio experience, and it's a phone call that anyone can call into. It's well, there are some phone calls that I would like to listen to that would be really interesting. Will the median phone call be interesting to listen to, especially when you just let anyone sign up for an account? Probably not. And again, in this, eventually we're all, walking around in the world again. And, maybe I decide to take a long walk on a Saturday afternoon and I think, hey, I'm going to open up Clubhouse and see if there's any smart people talking about things. Okay, sure. Maybe that'll happen. But in a world where I'm listening to half the audio that I used to, how much time? Oh, and also, by the way, a world in which I am just living on Zoom calls all day long. How much room do I have for just an audio Zoom call at the end of the day to unwind, when I can't even get through the podcast on my queue? So, this is all uninformed ranting because I have not used it myself. A bunch of my friends have used it and they tend to be generally pretty positive, but they've also said this thing is not ready for prime time. They're still kind of nailing some of that product market fit, trying to sand down the edges and discover that unique behavior that is actually sustainable and is going to want to make people come back to it again and again.
Right. Yeah. I mean, so you think it's overvalued?
When it comes to valuation, that is the hardest.
You're
thing
in
for me to
Silicon
predict.
Valley, man. They're not known for small valuations.
Sure, but here's why. It's so right now it's valued at $100 million, but the question is not, is it worth $100 million? Because if it is worth $100 million, it's actually probably worth $1 billion, right? So the question is it worth $1 billion or is it worth nothing? And it right now, it looks more like it is worth more than nothing. And so it's worth $100 million. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
So all of these things are just sort of
on or off, basically.
Exactly. Yeah. That's exactly the way to think about it. So they can, whatever, funny money number they want to write down is fine. I just see that and I think people think that it is closer to working than not working.
Right. But from the friends you have on it, you don't think that if they launched tomorrow, it would withstand people's attention and they'd keep coming back after the hype died?
I don't know, man. It's I did one audio tweet yesterday.
And what are your thoughts on audio Twitter then? Segueing to that,
it was I just left a fake voicemail message, and it was funny for me. Did I wake up this morning and be oh, I've got a lot of sick ideas for new audio tweets? No, as with Periscope, another Twitter project where initially it was a lot of fun to use. Oh yeah, I'm gonna hop on Periscope, do a little live stream, talk to people. What the Meerkat people, Meerkat sort of invented the model.
That house
co-invented
party.
it. Alongside Periscope. And what they found was you would do a Meerkat broadcast, but then your time between broadcasts would increase every single time. So maybe you would do one Monday, one Tuesday, but then your next one would be Thursday. And then your next one would be the following Monday. And then your next one would be 2 weeks from then. It was there was just something about that behavior that was not sticky over time. So, maybe voice notes find some kind of niche within Twitter. And I think they might. I think there's some obvious utility in being able to upload audio only messages. But, you can also upload video in Twitter. How many videos do you see in Twitter? It feels like a fairly rare use case to me. So, it's I'm happy that it's there, but I don't think it's revolutionary.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I've experienced is just from some of my friends who've also wanted to get into podcasting is they realize they actually hate listening to their voice. And I feel like that's a lot of the benefit of Twitter is it's quick, get it out of your brain, put it on to a tweet, very simple, straightforward. And so, I don't know, I'm not 100% sold. Do you think some of these trends we're seeing in tech, once quarantine is lifted, and you're in San Francisco, which is probably one of the most precautious areas in terms of quarantine in the US for sure. Do you think once it is lifted, we're going to see kind of different tech trends? Netflix numbers are going to drop and people are just going to start downloading Airbnb again and just go crazy? Or do you think a lot of these trends we're seeing in technology are kind of here to stay?
So just to be a total name dropper, I asked Mark Zuckerberg this question because I had the exact same question. And the time that I asked him this was when they released Messenger Rooms, right?
Yeah. Okay.
So this was like a month or so ago. And, Messenger Rooms are just kind of live hangout spaces, kind of like Zoom, where people can come hang out on video. And I said, all right, so you made this huge investment in this. That indicates to me that you think these trends are here to stay, but what if they're not? As soon as I can leave my house, I will. And what he said was, well, if you look at the trends before COVID, it was like the number of minutes that people were spending on calls on Messenger and WhatsApp were already growing at these huge rates. So now that rate has accelerated. So all of that to him feels like this one-way door where even when people can say travel for business again, they're now going to realize that they don't need to in a lot of cases. And they'll be probably happier to just do it as a Zoom. But this is the hardest thing to predict, right? To me, there's a very real question about, do I ever go back to an office? You read these reports of companies reopening their offices, and it's well, things are going to be a little different. There now needs to be 100 yards of space.
You don't want to work in a big circle.
Yeah, and you need to wear a full scuba apparatus the entire time that you're in, and you're going to be floating in a vat of hand sanitizer. I mean, it's like they're designing torture chambers for workers that no one is ever going to voluntarily work at. So I think for as long as that is the case, then yes, you're going to see people, inventing all kinds of stuff to make, what we're doing now feel more livable.
Coming up, my conversation with Casey Newton continues, but first a quick message from our sponsor. This episode of The Ones Who Succeed is brought to you by Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning platform with thousands of classes in business, marketing, technology, design, and more. You can take classes in social media marketing, video editing, entrepreneurship, you name it, they've got it. So whether you're trying to deepen your professional skill set, start a side hustle, or just explore a new passion, Skillshare is there to keep you learning and thriving. So, ladies and gentlemen, here is the call to action. Skillshare is offering the Ones Who Succeed listeners 2 months of unlimited access to thousands of classes, all for free. To sign up, go to Skillshare.com/succeed. Again, that's Skillshare.com/succeed. That link is how they know the Ones Who Succeed sent you to start your first 2 months now. You can find that link in the description of this podcast, and it would be awesome if you can support our show by supporting our sponsors. So one last time, visit Skillshare.com/succeed to start your first 2 months of Skillshare Premium today. And thanks to Skillshare for sponsoring the show. Welcome back to the program. This is The Ones Who Succeed. I'm Campbell Barron. I hope you're having a great day today. And I'm about halfway through my conversation with Casey Newton. Casey is a reporter at The Verge covering Silicon Valley, and of course the founder of the popular newsletter The Interface, all of which make him a very interesting person to talk to, so we're going to jump right back into that conversation. And you mentioned you talked to Mark Zuckerberg, which just a subtle name drop. Do you get nervous when you do these kind of big interviews? Because you've been quite critical of Zuckerberg, rightfully so. Yeah. And I share the same perspectives you do on the Facebook stance, but you're talking to a very powerful guy.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely get nervous before big interviews sometimes. I remember vividly the first time I ever interviewed Mark and scripting every single word, and I almost made it so that when I got into the room, literally all I had to do was read the words on the page, and then I didn't have to think. It was so in the worst
Hi, Mark,
case scenario.
nice to meet you.
yeah, and then just start reading off the page, and the interview went fine. and I'm sure that you found this because it sounds like you've interviewed a bunch of folks, but people are very different. Sometimes you'll ask somebody a question and they will give you the shortest possible answer.
Yeah.
Sometimes you'll ask somebody a question and it'll spark something in them and they will deliver an epic filibuster and you feel like you're never going to get a word in edgewise ever again. And the best thing that happens is it's somewhere in between, right? Where you feel like you're actually I feel like I'm actually having a conversation with you right now. You're clearly not just reading notes off a page. We're having some back and forth, right? So to me, that's the ideal situation. And I think the likelihood of getting there is higher when you know someone a little bit. So, in the case of Zuckerberg, I've now spoken with him, I would say a big handful of times. Yeah. And it does get a little bit easier every time because, sure, I've been critical, but he also knows where I'm coming from. And, my hope is, and people at Facebook have said this to me, that they feel like I'm fair and I bring an open mind to things, and when you look at the other Facebook critics out there, there are a lot of them that say Facebook should be shut down and all the executives should go to jail. And I don't believe that. And so I'm actually kind of a centrist among the Facebook critics, because I do think Facebook has the right to exist, which sort of makes me a more liberal Facebook critic.
What do you think Zuck's motives are?
I think that he wants to run a large civilization. I think it's that simple.
He's power hungry.
But not in the sense of he wants to run a large civilization so that he can dictate, how it works. I really don't see him as someone who is mad for power in that sense. I think he likes the idea of just having a huge thing to run and to see what it can do. He's a very competitive person. I think he's an incredibly shrewd business person. And there's just a kind of competitiveness about business, right? You have a podcast, you probably want a lot of people to download it, right? Yeah. And you'll probably try a bunch of things to make that happen. Mm-hmm. And in a lot of ways, he's an entrepreneur like any other. He's just really, really good at it. Yeah. But, people love to ascribe these incredibly dark motives to him. He wants to destroy democracy and he wants, Trump to be president for life. And, that is just not my sense at all. I think he loves Facebook and he wants Facebook to be the absolute biggest thing in the world. And he's convinced that if it is, then he can do all kinds of good and that the world will be a better place. And his life's work is proving that Facebook is positive for the world.
Do you think his political ideologies affect Facebook's decision in regards to, it seems so easy, just ban political ads. Do you know how many problems that would solve? When Twitter did that was a big deal. And Twitter's ad network was no Facebook.
Right. So what I think he would say is, well, Twitter barely sold any political ads to begin with. So that was really just kind of a move to get around a positive press. The other thing that he would say is, I think the assumption is that only sort of conservatives want there to be political ads because then they can use them to lie. But actually, a lot of Democrats were opposed to Facebook banning political ads because they're used by incumbents very successfully, right? Facebook is an incredible advertising machine. Mm-hmm. And if you're brand new and maybe you're running in a conservative district, but you're a Democrat and I don't know, you're a war hero and you have some backstory that seems like you could actually win, then Facebook ads might be really effective. Right. And I think if you believe in democracy, traditionally the right of politicians to address their constituents has not been seen as a very controversial thing, right? The idea of democracy is that politicians are going to share their ideas with us and then we're going to debate them and then we're going to vote on who we want to represent us. And a paid advertisement is just an extension of that. So I do think it's really interesting how many people want to ban political advertising when we're not going to ban ads for, cigarettes or alcohol or other things that seem way worse than, somebody taking out an ad on Facebook to say support immigration reform or something. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if I'm speaking to Casey Newton, not Mark Zuckerberg, and we're looking at this, it seems like it would solve a lot of problems. And doesn't it just become an arms race, basically? Who can use Facebook's platform better and who could spend more money on ads?
Yes. I mean, I do think that's true. And, Trump has been really good at it. And I will say that Trump has used Facebook in ways where I would have taken more action than Facebook did, right? The fact that after his tweets about protesters and mail-in voting, that Twitter and Snap both took action against him and Facebook didn't, like that does actually make Facebook the outlier there, right? And like that is a case where I side with Twitter and Snap, and I would have taken some sort of action against those posts because to me the looter shooter protest tweets that were cross-posted at Facebook seem clearly to have been inciting violence. And we know that they were because they did, in fact, incite a lot of violence in the United States over that weekend. So that is a place where I think they could have taken a stronger hand.
Is it clear what Zuckerberg's political ideologies are?
I think that he's an interesting one because he really does believe in free speech in the kind of center-right libertarian way. And is really standing firm on that principle. And he's sacrificed a lot to stand on that principle, right? Like he's got employees quitting, Facebook's reputation.
Virtual walkouts,
Yeah, so he has stood firm on that principle. Now, I also think it's the only stance he can really take if Facebook is to remain a home for Democrats and Republicans. Like he sort of is always going to have to be all things to all people in order to make this mass civilization work. And so he's always going to have people who hate him for making one decision or not making one decision, right? So that's like sort of one side of his politics, and that's where we focus a lot. But then the other side of it is like kind of run-of-the-mill liberal progressive. Like, look where he donates his money, right? It's to, Black Lives Matter and immigration reform to get more immigrants into the country. Right. He's like a tutor at a school in East Palo Alto.
He's a tutor at a school in East Palo Alto.
Yeah. What? He's tutored like some immigrants.
Oh my God.
And that's like sort of really, really shaped his thinking. So yeah, like very liberal progressive in one sense, and then very kind of center right on this speech issue, and also probably like on a lot of corporate issues, right? Like he's probably not super pro taxes, right? He's like, probably not in love with regulation.
I wonder why. Yeah, no, yeah. It seems like it. Do you think these platforms are going to have to make a choice, basically, in terms of left or right? I mean, Twitter and Jack Dorsey, it seems like he's kind of, all right, we're kind of done with this BS, Trump. We're going to start flagging these as just wrong.
I mean, they're going to do everything they can to not make a choice in the sense of like, when you log into Twitter, it's not going to say, welcome to Twitter, home for Democrats, right? Like they're going to make it a place where a lot of people can thrive. Keep in mind that a lot of the noise you hear around, oh, this platform is censoring me. Like that is the original conservative grift. They've said it about every form of media ever. And they have gone out and invented new forms of media to get around the gatekeeping that the other media were doing, right? So like that's the rise of talk radio in the 90s. It's the rise of Fox News in the 2000s, right? And then it's sort of the rise of the conservative blogosphere and the YouTube blogosphere that we've seen in the past decade, right? So conservatives are very good at, dominating media and then complaining that they're not being given a fair shake. And that will just never stop because it always works, right? It always works to play the victim and say that you're being censored. So right. I just think that these platforms are going to have to learn to live with it and tune it out a little bit. But, some of that noise is actually coming from Congress, and there are now, multiple proposals to make life more difficult for companies that want to do content moderation. The primary practical effect of which will be Nazis running free on these platforms if it were actually to be enacted. So, I mean, this is just going to be like an endless battlefield, and it's why I write 4 columns about it a week.
Yep. Yeah. Okay. I want to take a turn from all this politics here. And so you've kind of been in Silicon Valley for a bit. You started this program by saying you became a writer because you were interested in it in grade 2. Hopefully you're not implying that we all have to follow through our interest in grade 2, but
I mean, I do want you to get back into filmmaking, but go on.
I'm interested in media in general, but in terms of you being in Silicon Valley, you literally report on startups being funded. You report on the good, you report on the bad, you report on the nasty, you report on overhyped startups going out of business. It's a tough world out there. Have you ever been tempted, or have you ever wanted to build a product yourself? Have you ever wanted to actually start a company? Because you kind of know everyone. I don't think it'd be that hard for you to get funding. I don't think it'd be that hard for you to get a few beta users. I'm just curious. Have you ever been tempted?
Yeah, totally. And honestly, it was starting the newsletter that let me scratch that itch, right?
Yeah.
I was in this position where, I was writing a few stories for the Verge a week, and some would be hits and some wouldn't, but it never really felt like I was building anything. And I don't think you can live in San Francisco for 10 years and not just be inspired by the entrepreneurs all around you, right? Yeah. And sometimes you talk to entrepreneurs and you think, this person is so much smarter than me, like I'm embarrassed to be in the same room with them. And then other times you interview an entrepreneur and you're like, well, I'm smarter than this guy, right? And like, so you just kind of keep seeing yourself as like in between those two poles, and inevitably you kind of want to do something. And the fun thing about starting the newsletter was I got to exercise that entrepreneurial impulse. I got to design the look and feel of it. I got to decide what the sections of it would be. I got to decide how often it would come out, when it would come out, what the style of it would be, the voice of it would be. And then I got to try to grow it, right? And try a bunch of things and see it get some early traction and see how I could increase that traction. And then from there, think about, well, what other platforms can we spin this off to? So we've done some live events around it, right? I would love to do something in audio around it. So it's just kind of given me a home to exercise all those entrepreneurial impulses while still having the backing of a big company that can, pay my healthcare and do human resources stuff and not make me actually have to run a company while I'm also trying to understand how Facebook works.
Right. So it's a part of The Verge, but you run it kind of independently with your own editorial control. It obviously grew to be a pretty prominent newsletter. Do you think there are too many newsletters, Casey?
No, I mean, it's like sort of like asking, are there too many podcasts, too many YouTube channels, or too many video games? Like on the one hand, the answer is like, yes, there's more than you can ever consume in your lifetime. But is there one that hasn't been invented yet that if it came along would be your favorite thing ever? Of course, right? Like there's always going to be room for that thing that, comes along. There was a lot of writing about Facebook before I started the newsletter. Like no one would have said there's not enough Facebook content, but I don't think it was being organized in a way that made it digestible, that also gave people some perspective about it and some things to think about. And I put that out into the world and found a home for it, right? And I just think so many other people are going to have that opportunity. I've been so impressed with the newsletters that my friends and other journalists I know have launched in the past couple of years as people kind of think through, what could I do with this medium? I think a thing that is under commented on is how bad the incentives of the ad-supported web are, right? If you are running a digital media property, you need to create a lot of content, which means creating a lot of cheap content, which means a lot of what time is the Super Bowl. It means a lot of how to install an update on your iPhone, right? Or it's like, oh, here's two people tweeting angrily at each other. Here's, 200 words and 2 embedded tweets, and we'll call that a story, right? And then all of it's competing for attention on Facebook and Twitter. So all of the headlines tend to be the most outrageous interpretation of anything, right? So these incentives are bad, right? Like there's plenty of amazing work that is done within those constraints, but there's also a lot of terrible work. A newsletter has the opportunity to be something so different. It is not competing for your attention the way that Facebook or Twitter are. The only thing I'm competing for is for you to read my newsletter 4 times a week and think, this person is smart. Like they know what they're talking about. I got something out of it. It was useful. That was a good read, right? If I can do that, they'll open the next one no matter what the subject line says. And so it gives me an opportunity to do something that I could never do on the kind of dominant platform of our time, which is the web. And so I just think there's something so cool about that. And I want to see other people experiment with it.
Yeah, you can kind of break away from the shadow of The Verge. And I think you figured that out quite well. In terms of, there's no easy way to segue this. What are your thoughts on Quibi?
I mean, the dominant platform of our times. I mean, it's hard to imagine that it's only been a few months since Quibi came along and changed the way that we consume content.
Right, exactly.
I mean,
by holding our phone up and down.
Yeah.
And then switching it sideways.
I mean, I think that Murder Flip House is probably going to win all of the Emmys this year. I don't even know why they're making other TV shows at this point. No, look, the thing with Quibi was like, you want to make a TV service? You want to spend $1 billion? Okay, well, you better make one show that the entire country wants to see. And they didn't do it. Like, there's a lot that you could say about that. At the end of the day, it's like, why do people subscribe to Disney Plus? Yeah, they wanted to watch the Avengers movies. They wanted to watch Aladdin and The Little Mermaid. But you know what they really wanted to watch was freaking Baby Yoda. So, Quibi needed a Baby Yoda and they didn't have a Baby Yoda. So, like, for me, the entire question about Quibi is like, I don't know, can they find their baby Yoda? Because if they don't, then say goodbye. And Snapchat will probably buy the technology for $100.
Yeah, I think you phrased this really well. Like, it's not necessarily that there are too many streaming services out there. It's just people will always gravitate towards the content that's interesting universally.
Totally. I mean, I do have most of the streaming services because, again, I'm, legally trapped inside my house and have been for months now. But I really like the show Billions on Showtime. So I just subscribed to Showtime and then I watched all the seasons of Billions and then I turned off my subscription because Showtime doesn't have anything else that I want to see. But hey, at least Showtime got that $12 out of me. There's no reason why Quibi couldn't get that $12 out of me too. They just have to give me something as good as Billions.
I mean, as a fellow Canadian, I've heard you rave about Schitt's Creek before.
Oh my God. I mean, iconic. That entire, talk about entrepreneurialism. So you have the Levies, like that family, and they have this idea and they pitch it to Pop TV, which, no offense, Canada, but not super familiar to a lot of us here in America. And, it does maybe okay. And it's very low budget. So it gets renewed and they don't have a lot of attention on them, which actually gives them the freedom to make something extremely idiosyncratic, very much true to their own entrepreneurial vision of what they think a sitcom should be, even though it's it's got way more heart than the average American sitcom would ever get away with. And then they drop this thing on Netflix, which I'm sure Netflix got it very cheap. And then all of a sudden, us Americans start watching it and we're just like, what is this incredibly unique, wonderful, hilarious show? And now, I would say it's like basically a generation defining sitcom. And it really was because a bunch of entrepreneurs were able to do their own thing without too much interference.
It's run on the CBC for a while in Canada, and it's been a big hit here, but that's not the ideal market, right? And I think it's great that it's catching fire. Okay, a few more questions. Casey, you get a lot of pitches. I guess you have to, but I'm sure putting your email address in your Twitter bio is definitely something you might regret periodically. What catches the eye?
So, number one, when the founder emails me directly, honestly catches my eye. I always try to respond to a founder writes to me. I think it's really weird that people go to all the trouble of designing some new app or service, and then instead of saying, well, who else writes about this industry, right? Presumably if you're in an industry, you read stuff about it and are aware of at least the publications that cover it, right? If not the individual writers. But instead of just figuring that out and sending an email to the relevant person, you hire a PR agency and you pay them $25,000 a month. And they just have a database of every email address for every reporter. And they just send a generic pitch to, the few hundred of us reporters who are left and pray that one of us says yes. Why is that a better system than just figuring out you're the entrepreneur? Why can't you figure out how to get in touch with the relevant person, right? To me, this is just kind of an intelligence test. So, there are now 6 PR people for every working journalist in the United States. Yes, it's a true fact from census data. And you can just imagine what the consequences of that are, right? Not only do we have fewer watch guards, understanding this catastrophic world that we're living in, but people like me spend a good part of our day just fending off pitches from people who sometimes I like to fantasize, what if one day The Verge just said yes to every pitch? The Verge would be the most unreadable garbage website you have ever seen. It would just be an endless list of terrible ideas and who cares? Absolutely unbelievable. Yep. And so I really think it is a shame. If you want to get my attention, I actually have, if you go to theverge.com/pages/interface, I think I'm getting that right. I actually have a guide to what the interface is and what I write about. And they're questions that I'm trying to answer. It'd be so easy for someone to just go read that page and say, hey, Casey, I know you're interested in these questions. I'm building an app or service that is related to those. Would you like to hear more? Or better yet, get in touch with me before you're launching a product. That's the other thing. It's people will spend 2 years building something and then 48 hours before they're going to launch it, they just hope that there's an opening on my schedule that I can drop everything and write about it. And usually I can't, right? Mm-hmm. The other thing I found, it actually doesn't matter whether I write about your thing when it launches or not, right? Everybody wants the launch story. I did write a hey launch story. That's the one launch story I will probably write this year. Every once in a while, something comes along.
To be fair, it's a really good story.
Yeah, and those things will come along, but you're competing for the one slot a year that a launch story is actually going to be interesting. Otherwise, I can just wait to see if it catches on, like particularly with social products, they're way more interesting to write about when other people are using them, right? But like what all these social entrepreneurs want me to do is say like, hey, we've like remixed 3 social features you've already seen into like some new app with new branding, write a launch story. It's like, no, I'm not going to do that, right? Like if you get 10 million users, let me know, then maybe it'll be interesting. Right. So there's just like so little incentive for me to pay attention to like 99% of these pitches.
All right. My last question for you. You've been in Silicon Valley for quite a while. You've kind of seen the industry evolve. Has technology as a whole improved the world?
Oh my God. I don't know how you weigh this. That's the honest question. Like, I don't know by what metric you weigh this.
Yeah,
like, you
no,
could look
fair.
at
it's an ambiguous question.
You could look at the global standard of living. You could look at how many people have like come out of poverty in the past 20 years. There are a lot of stats you can use to build a case that technology has been very, very good, right? Or that the world has been getting good. On the other hand, the stuff that I look at, which is like, is society more polarized? Is democracy holding up? Does it seem like the human brain can process what we are seeing every day on Twitter and Facebook and in our social feeds? The answer feels a lot closer to no. I wrote a series of features last year about content moderators whose job it is to clean up the worst of the web. And it's very hard for me to feel like technology improved their lives because some of them still have PTSD from the job that they were doing, which was just kind of enabling the technology that you and I use. So here's the thing, though. Like, I started writing about technology because I do love it. I've been writing about politics before I started writing about tech. I wanted to write about tech because it was a subject that people felt really optimistic about. They would go out of their way to read these stories. It gave them something to be excited about the future. And I'm actually a pretty sunny, optimistic person, right? I want to believe that the world is going to be better tomorrow than it is today. So I think the thing that has kept me paying such close attention to these issues for 10 years now is because I ultimately want to believe that the tech is good for the world. And I'm just trying to reckon with all of the evidence to the contrary that we see every day.
Well, Casey, well said. I really appreciate your insights and always your time. Great to get to talk to you.
Well, thanks for having me, Campbell. It was great to talk to you.
That's Casey Newton, one of the ones who succeed. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show, it would be amazing if you could leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. It really helps us out. Or why not tell a friend? That also helps new listeners discover the show. I really appreciate it. If you want to see clips from the show and stay up to date with what I'm working on, you could follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at Campbell J. Barron. And you can find this podcast on YouTube. Our channel name is The Ones Who Succeed. You've made it to the end of the show. Thanks for listening. I'm your host, Campbell Barron, and I'll be back in no time.